The smile at the will reading. My brother smiled before the lawyer finished reading. That was the first thing I noticed. Not my father's cold face, not my mother's handkerchief pressed against her lips, not the heavy wooden table in the attorney's office, or the rain sliding down the window behind us. I noticed my brother's smile, small, quiet, almost hidden, but I saw it. His name was Mason, my older brother, the golden son, the one who could fail and still be called under pressure, the one who could lie and still be called confused, the one who could take and still be called family. And me, I was Clara Whitmore, the daughter who stayed, the daughter who cooked Grandpa's meals when his hands started shaking, the daughter who drove him to doctor visits when everyone else was busy, the daughter who sat beside his bed at midnight while he talked about old memories, old regrets, and the farm he loved more than any place on earth. But when the will was read, Mason smiled like all those years meant nothing. The lawyer, Mr. Henley, adjusted his glasses and continued in a flat, careful voice to my grandson Mason Whitmore. I leave the Whitmore farmhouse, the surrounding land, the workshop, and all remaining business accounts connected to the estate. My mother let out a soft breath. My father nodded once, like this was expected. Mason leaned back in his chair, and I felt the room tilt. The farmhouse, Grandpa's farmhouse, the place where I had spent nearly every weekend of my childhood, the place where Grandpa taught me how to plant tomatoes in straight lines, the place where he kept an old radio in the kitchen and played songs from before I was born, the place where he told me again and again, Clara, this house remembers who shows up. I had shown up. Mason had not. But the will said his name, not mine. Mr. Henley kept reading. To my granddaughter, Clara Whitmore, I leave my personal books, my grandfather clock, and the contents of the upstairs sewing room. Books, a clock, a dusty room. My brother got the land, the home, the accounts, the workshop, and the legacy. I got objects. My father looked at me, not with sympathy, but warning. Do not make a scene. He did not need to say it. I had spent my whole life reading his face. My mother leaned toward me and whispered, your grandfather knew what he was doing. That sentence cut deeper than the will. Because if Grandpa knew what he was doing, then what did that mean? Had I imagined our bond? Had I misunderstood every late-night conversation? Had he looked at me holding his trembling hand and still decided that Mason, the brother who barely visited, deserved everything? I stared at the table. Mason finally spoke. Well, he said, with that smooth voice he used when he wanted to sound humble, I'll do my best to honor Grandpa. Honor. The word almost made me laugh. Mason had not honored him when Grandpa called and asked for help fixing the porch railing. He had not honored him when he missed 2 Christmas dinners because he was networking. He had not honored him when Grandpa spent his last birthday waiting near the window for a grandson who never came. But now, with the farmhouse in his pocket, he wanted to honor him. Mr. Henley closed the folder. That concludes the reading. The rain tapped harder against the glass. For a moment no one moved. Then Mason stood and buttoned his jacket. He turned to me with fake softness in his eyes. I know this is emotional, Clara. I looked up at him. Do you? His smile tightened. We all lost him. No, I said quietly. Some of us lost him. Some of you gained property. My mother gasped. Clara. My father's voice was low enough. Mason's eyes flashed, but he recovered quickly. I understand you're hurt. I stood. No, Mason. You understand you won. He looked around the room as if asking everyone to witness how unreasonable I was being. I didn't write the will. That was true. And it was the sentence he would hide behind for the next few days. I didn't write the will. I didn't choose this. Grandpa did. But something inside me could not accept it. Not because I wanted revenge. Because I knew my grandfather. He was not careless. He was not cruel. He did not play favorites in public and hide love in private. If Grandpa left me only books and a clock, there had to be a reason. Or there had to be a lie. As I walked out of the attorney's office, Mason followed me into the hallway. Clara, he said. I turned. He stepped closer and lowered his voice. You should be careful with what you say from now. I stared at him. Is that a threat? He smiled again. That same small smile. No, it's advice. Grandpa made his choice. Fighting it will only make you look greedy. Greedy. That word followed me all the way down the hallway. I had given 4 years of my life to caring for Grandpa. Mason had given excuses, but I was the greedy one. When I reached the lobby, I saw a man standing near the door. He was older, maybe in his late 60s, wearing a dark coat and holding a worn leather folder against his chest. He looked familiar, but I could not place him. His eyes moved from Mason to me. Then he said my name. Clara Whitmore? I stopped. Yes? He looked past me toward the attorney's office door, then back at me. My name is Thomas. Your grandfather told me to come if Mason smiled at the will. My breath caught. Behind me, Mason froze, and for the first time that day, my brother stopped smiling. The granddaughter who stayed before the stranger knocked on the truth. There were years no one to count. People love to talk about inheritance like it begins at the will. It does not. Inheritance begins in quiet, in hospital chairs, in unpaid hours, in hands held when there are no cameras, no lawyers, no applause. My grandfather, Edward Whitmore, was not an easy man. He was loving, yes, but stubborn. He believed coffee should be black, fences should be straight, and promises should outlive convenience. He had built his farmhouse with his own hands after coming back from years of hard factory. It sat on 16 acres of land outside a small town, with a red barn, a workshop, apple trees, and a gravel driveway that turned muddy every spring. To make Mason, it was property. To me, it was memory. When I was little, Grandpa used to call me Little Sparrow because I was always asking questions and never standing still. Mason was Champ. My father loved that. Champ sounded strong. Sparrow sounded small. That was how our family saw us. Mason was the heir before anyone said the word. He was 2 years older than me, tall, charming, and good at making adults believe him. If he broke a window, he said he was practicing baseball. If I argued, I was being dramatic. If he borrowed money and forgot to pay it back, he was going through a phase. If I made one mistake, my father treated it like proof that daughters needed guidance. My mother did not challenge. She believed peace was more important than fairness. So peace usually meant I swallowed pain quietly. Grandpa was different, he noted. When Mason took credit for fixing the fence I had helped repair, Grandpa said, "Your sister held that post steady for 2 hours. Don't steal labor you didn't." Mason laughed at him. Dad said Grandpa was being hard on him. Grandpa only looked at me and winked. Those small moments kept me alive in that family. Years passed. Mason moved to the city and started chasing big plans. Some worked for a while. Most fell apart. He opened a car detailing business with borrowed money, closed it within a year. He invested in rental properties with friends, lost money and blamed the market. He got engaged twice. Both women left. He said they could not handle ambition. I stayed closer to home. I became a community college office administrator. Not glamorous, not rich, but steady. I liked helping students find their way through forms, schedules, and financial aid confusion. Maybe because I knew what it felt like to need one person in a system to speak kindly. When Grandpa's health began to decline, the family held a meeting at my parents' house. My father said, "We all need to contribute." Mason nodded seriously. "I'll come down whenever I can." He came twice in the first month. Then business got busy. Then his car needed repairs. Then he had meetings. Then he stopped giving reasons and simply stopped showing up. My parents helped sometimes, but my father and Grandpa argued too much, and my mother got overwhelmed easily, so the responsibility slid toward me at first. I did not mind. Grandpa and I had always been close. I drove him to appointments, picked up medicine, cleaned the kitchen, paid bills from the checkbook he kept in the top drawer, sat with him while he watched old westerns and complained that modern actors mumbled. Then the small tasks became bigger. His hands shook more. His walking became slower. He forgot dates. He left the stove on once. I started spending weekends there, then 3 nights a week. Then almost every evening after work. People praised me sometimes. "You're such a good granddaughter." But praise does not fill a gas tank. Praise does not give back lost. Praise does not sit beside you when you cry in your car because the person you love is fading and everyone else is too busy. Grandpa saw the cost. One evening, after I helped him into his chair, he said, "You're giving up too much, Sparrow." I smiled and adjusted his blanket. "You gave me tomato plants and bad life advice for 20 years. I owe you." He chuckled. "My advice was excellent. You told me never to trust a man with clean boots, and I stand by it." We laughed. Then his face softened. "Your brother been by?" I looked away. "He calls." Grandpa snorted. "A call is not a visit." I did not answer. He stared toward the window where the apple trees moved in. "Mason likes the idea of family. You do the work of." I swallowed. "He's still your grandson." "Yes," Grandpa said. "And you are still the one who shows up." That sentence stayed with me. You are still the one who shows up. In his final year, Grandpa became more serious about paperwork. He asked me to drive him to appointments with lawyers, bankers, and a man named Thomas. I asked who Thomas was. Grandpa said, "Old friend. Knows things." That was Grandpa's way of saying mind your business for now. I trusted him. Maybe too much. Once, after a meeting with Mr. Henley, the estate lawyer, Grandpa looked troubled. "Clara," he said as we drove home, "if anything ever looks wrong after I'm gone, don't let your father talk you into silence." I frowned. "What would look wrong?" He looked out the window. "Sometimes people hear what they want when an old man speaks." "Grandpa," he turned to me. "Promise me." I promised. But after he died, grief fogged my memory. Then came the will reading, Mason's smile, the stranger, and Grandpa's warning came back like a bell. "Do not let your father talk you into silence." The stranger with Grandpa's folder, Thomas Reed, did not look like the kind of man who changed families. He looked like a retired teacher, or a quiet neighbor who kept his lawn neat, his tools organized. His hair was gray. His coat was old but clean. His shoes were polished. His hands were steady around the leather folder he held like it mattered. Mason stared at him with sharp eyes. "Who are you?" my brother asked. Thomas did not look at him first. He looked at me. "I knew your grandfather for 42 years. My father had come out of the attorney's office by then." "What is going on?" Thomas's jaw tightened. "Edward asked me to attend the will reading from outside the room." My mother looked confused. "Why outside?" Thomas turned toward the office door. "Because he wanted to know who would smile." The hallway went silent. Mason laughed once, a short, fake laugh. "That's ridiculous." Thomas looked at him. "It is exactly what he said you would." Mason's face changed, not much, but enough. Mr. Henley, the lawyer, stepped into the hallway. "Mr. Reed?" Thomas nodded. "Henry, they knew each other." That made my father uncomfortable. Mr. Henley looked pale now, not like a man surprised, but like a man who had been waiting for an unpleasant part of his job. Thomas lifted the folder slightly. "Edward instructed me to deliver these only if the reading produced the outcome he feared." "What outcome?" Thomas's eyes softened. "The one where Mason walked out believing he owned everything." My brother snapped, "I do own it." The will was clear. Mr. Henley cleared his throat. "The will read today is valid as far as it goes?" I repeated. Thomas opened the folder. Inside were papers, letters, copies of checks, and a sealed envelope with my name written across it in Grandpa's. "Clara Sparrow Whitmore." I pressed my fingers to my mouth. Sparrow, no one else called me that. Thomas handed me the eye. Your grandfather wanted you to read this first. My father stepped forward. Wait, we need to understand what this is before. Thomas looked at him. Edward said you would try to stop her. My father froze. I opened the envelope with shaking hand. The letter was written in Grandpa's uneven but familiar handwriting. My little Sparrow, if you are reading this, then the wrong people believed they had won before the truth arrived. Do not cry over the will they read first. I know what it says. I allowed it to say what it says because I needed to see who would reveal themselves when they thought I could no longer speak. You were never forgotten. You were never less. You were the only one who showed up when showing up became hard. There is more than one document. Trust Thomas. Trust the sealed record. Trust your own memory of me. And do not let Mason's smile steal what I built with your hands beside mine. I had to stop reading. My eyes blurred. My legs felt weak. Daniel was not in this story. I had no husband standing beside me. No partner to hold me up. In that moment, I stood alone in a hallway with my family watching me break open. Thomas gently said, "There is more." Mason's voice rose. "This is manipulation." Grandpa was confused near the I turned on him. He knew enough to predict your smile. Mason's mouth shut. My father said, "Clara, calm down." There it was, the family command. Calm down. Be quiet. Do not embarrass us. Do not ask questions. Do not threaten the arrangement. Thomas said Edward signed a trust amendment 8 months before his death. The farmhouse and land were transferred into the Whitmore Preservation Trust. Mason was never meant to receive ownership outright. Mr. Henley looked down, my mother whispered. My father's face had gone gray. Mason stepped closer. That can't be true. Thomas removed a notarized document from the folder. It is true. Mr. Henley took the document, reviewed it, and sighed. This appears to be the Preservation Trust record. I looked at him. You knew. He looked pained. I knew a trust existed. I did not have the final witness packet. Edward placed conditional delivery with Mr. Reed. Why didn't you say that in the reading? Because the will had to be read as filed. The trust is a separate instrument, and Edward's instructions were unusual. Mason scoffed. Unusual? This is insane. Thomas turned to No, Mason. What was insane was thinking your grandfather spent his last years blind to who visited and who only waited. That sentence struck like thunder. My father said, Thomas, this is a family matter. Thomas looked at him calmly. No, this became a legal matter when your son began arranging to sell land that was never his to sell. My mouth went dry. I looked at Mason. What sale? Mason's face tightened. My mother whispered, Mason. Thomas pulled another paper from the folder. A purchase inquiry, 2 developers, 1 proposed subdivision. Your grandfather knew Mason had been meeting them while he was still alive. I stared at my brother. You were planning to sell the farm. Mason said nothing. The smile was gone now. Thomas looked at me. Your grandfather did not just leave you objects, Clara. He left you the authority to stop what Mason planned. Mr. Henley opened the trust amendment. Then he read the line that changed everything. Clara Whitmore shall serve as primary trustee of the Whitmore Preservation Trust, with full authority over the farmhouse, surrounding land, workshop, and preservation. I heard my mother gasp. My father sat down in the hallway chair. Mason looked at me like I had stolen from him. But I had not stolen anything. The stranger had simply brought the truth Grandpa left behind. The brother who wanted the land. Mason did not lose control immediately. That was not his style. He was too practiced for that. He straightened his jacket, lifted his chin, and forced a calm expression back onto his face. This needs to be verified, he said. Thomas nodded. It will be. Mason looked at Mr. Henley. You cannot just accept some folder from a stranger. Mr. Henley's voice was careful. Mr. Reed is not a stranger to the estate. He is listed as conditional document custodian in Edward's private instruction. My father looked up. Private instruction? Why was I not told? Thomas answered before the lawyer. Because Edward did not trust you to protect Clara if protecting Clara meant disappointing Mason. My father flinched as if slapped. I expected him to argue. He did not. That told me more than any confession. My mother began crying softly. Mason, tell me you were not going to sell the farm. Mason turned to her. Mom, don't start. Tell me. His jaw tightened. I was exploring options. Options. That was how people like Mason softened betrayal. He was not planning to erase Grandpa's land. He was exploring options. He was not trying to profit from grief. He was being practical. He was not hiding things. He was avoiding drama. I said, Grandpa was still alive. Mason looked at me. You have no idea how expensive that property is to maintain. I almost laughed. I maintained it. You visited. You played nurse. That does not make you an estate manager. The words landed hard. Played nurse. Every late night, every medication schedule, every doctor visit, every laundry basket, every meal, every moment I sat beside Grandpa while he forgot the same story and told it again. Mason reduced all of it to playing nurse. Thomas's voice went cold. Careful. Mason turned on him. You don't get to walk in here and act like you know our family. Thomas held his gaze. I know enough. I know your grandfather called you 6 times in the month before his final hospital stay. You answered once. I know Clara missed work without pay to sit with. I know you asked Edward whether the South Field could be rezoned while he was still recovering from pneumonia. My mother covered her mouth. My father closed his eyes. I looked at me. You asked him that? Mason snapped. He was sitting on value he refused to use. He was living in his home. He was dying in a house that needed more repairs than it was worth. The hallway went silent. Even Mason seemed to hear himself too late. Thomas looked at me with sadness. That is why Edward acted. My brother stepped back. I didn't mean it like that. But he had. Maybe not in the exact words, but in the shape of his choices. Grandpa's home had been an asset. Grandpa's illness had been a delay. Grandpa's death had been an opening. Mr. Henley asked us to return to the conference room. No one spoke as we sat again. This time, the seating felt different. Before, Mason sat like the future owner. Now he sat like a man whose secret had entered the room before him. Mr. Henley laid out the document. The will did leave certain estate items to Mason, but the property itself had already been transferred into a trust before Grandpa died. The will could not give Mason what was no longer personally owned by Grandpa at death. The trust named me primary trustee. Thomas Reed was temporary oversight witness for 90 days after disclosure. A preservation account existed for taxes, repairs, and maintenance. The upstairs sewing room contents, books, and clock were not scraps. They were tied to records. The books contained Grandpa's notes. The clock had a hidden compartment with a key. The sewing room held boxes of receipts, photographs, repair plans, and letters. Grandpa had given me the map. Mason had been given the illusion. I whispered, "Why would Grandpa do it this way?" Thomas looked at me gently. "Because he feared if he openly named you trustee before he passed, Mason and your father would pressure him as weak. He wanted the truth protected until he was beyond their reach." My father's voice cracked. Edward thought I would pressure him? Thomas did not soften the answer. "Yes." My mother looked at Dad. For once, she looked at him not as a wife trying to keep peace, but as a woman realizing peace had cost. Mason stood suddenly. "I will challenge this, Mr. Henley." "You have that right," Thomas said. Edward expected that too. Mason glared at him. Thomas removed one final envelope. "This is for when Mason says he will challenge." My brother went. On the envelope, Grandpa had written, "For the moment Mason threatens court." Thomas slid it across the table to me. "Open it." My hands trembled again. Inside was a short note. "Sparrow, if Mason challenges the trust, release the ledger. I am sorry you have to see it, Grandpa." I looked up. "What ledger?" Mason whispered. No. Thomas turned to him, and his voice was no longer gentle. "Your grandfather kept every record, the ledger and the clock. The grandfather clock had stood in the front hallway of the farmhouse for as long as I could remember. Dark wood, brass pendulum, a deep chime every hour. As a child, I was afraid of it. Grandpa used to say, 'Don't fear a clock, Sparrow. Time only scares people running from truth.' After the will reading, those words returned to me. Time only scares people running from truth." 2 days later, I went to the farmhouse with Thomas and Mr. Henley. My parents came too. Mason did not. He said through his attorney that he was reviewing options. That meant he was scared. The farmhouse felt different when I entered it. Not empty, waiting. The air smelled like old paper, lemon oil, and the peppermint candies Grandpa kept in a bowl near his chair. I paused in the hallway. The clock stood against the wall, still ticking. Thomas handed me a small key. "Edward said you would know where this belonged." I looked at the clock. There was a tiny brass plate near the lower back panel. I had seen it 100 times but never thought it opened. The key turned smoothly. A hidden compartment clicked open. Inside was a narrow ledger wrapped in cloth. My mother whispered, "Oh, Edward." I pulled it out carefully. The cover was worn brown leather. Inside, Grandpa's handwriting filled the pages. Dates, amounts, names, notes. At first, I did not understand. Then I saw Mason $8,000, business loan, unpaid. Mason $3,500. Mason requested early inheritance advance. Mason met with developer without after page. It was not just money, it was pattern. Grandpa had documented every time he promised repayment, every time he failed, every time he blamed someone else. Then I saw my own name, Clara Grossman. Clara missed work for appointment, tried to hide it. Clara paid pharmacy balance, reimbursed from household fund. Clara repaired portrail with own money, must repay her. Clara made soup, stayed overnight during storm. Clara cried in car, things I did not see, I broke. Not because of money, because he had seen. All those moments I thought were invisible, Grandpa. He had written them. He knew. My mother cried beside me. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I wanted to say because you did not look, but I did not yet." Thomas pointed to the final section. There were notes from Grandpa's last year. Mason believes land should be sold. Mason asked whether Clara can be handled. Robert agrees Mason needs a clean inheritance. I fear they will make Clara look. Must protect the farm from impatience. Must protect Clara from family pressure. Robert was my father. I looked at him. His face had lost all color. "You agreed with him?" Dad rubbed his forehead. "I thought Mason could manage the estate. You thought Mason could sell it." He did not answer. My mother turned to him. "Robert?" Dad said quietly. The farm was becoming too much. "For Grandpa," I asked, "or for Mason?" No answer. Thomas opened another box in the sewing room. Inside were copies of letters between Mason and a developer called Harlow Ridge Community. The subject lines were polite. Potential future acquisition. Land value estimate. Post-estate transition. Post-estate transit. That meant after Grandpa died. My brother had been planning, not grieving. Planning. The letters showed Mason had suggested he would soon control the property. He had even sent photographs of the south field, the barn, and the apple trees Grandpa planted with my grandmother. My mother sat down in the sewing room chair. I raised him, she whispered. How did I not see this? Thomas answered softly. Sometimes parents see the child they want, not the adult standing in front of them. Dad stared out the window. I opened a box of books next. Inside each cover, Grandpa had written small notes. Some were memories, some were instructions. One book, an old copy of Little Women my grandmother, contained another envelope. For Clara when the house feels too heavy. I opened it. Sparrow, do not let bitterness turn you into them. Truth is enough. You do not have to hate Mason to stop him. You do not have to punish your father to refuse his plan. You only have to stand still and let the facts speak. A crooked fence does not become straight because everyone agrees not to. Fix the fence. Love, Grandpa. I held the letter against my chest. That was Grandpa. Firm, loving, impossible to ignore. Over the next week, the estate fight began. Mason filed a challenge against the trust. He claimed Grandpa was confused. He claimed Thomas influenced. He claimed I manipulated an old man. That was the part that hurt most. After all those years of care, my brother stood before a court and suggested my love had been a strategy. My father did not publicly support him, but he did not defend me either. Silence again. Family silent. The old language of cowardice. But this time I was not alone. Thomas stood with me. Mr. Henley submitted the trust documents. The ledger was copied. The letters were preserved. And Grandpa's truth began moving through legal channels, slow but steady, like water finding cracks in stone. When the family turned on me before the court date, the family called a meeting. Not to apologize, not to understand, to pressure me. My mother asked me to come to her house on a Sunday afternoon. I just want everyone to talk, she said. Everyone meant danger, I knew that. But I went anyway because part of me still wanted to see whether truth had changed anyone. It had not changed enough. When I walked in, my father was in his chair. My mother sat on the sofa twisting her wedding ring. Aunt Carol was. So was Uncle Jim. Two cousins sat near the kitchen, pretending not to listen. Mason stood by the window, arms crossed, looking wounded. He had always been good at looking wounded after hurting someone else. Aunt Carol spoke first. Clara, honey, we all know you did a lot for Edward. A compliment before the blade. But this court fight is tearing the family apart. I looked at Mason. The court fight he filed? Mason sighed. I filed because this situation is confusing. I laughed quietly. It was clear until a stranger exposed your plan. His face hardened. Dad said, Clara. I turned to him. No, I'm not 12. You do not get to say my name like a command. The room went silent. My mother whispered, please, let's not fight. I looked at her. Then tell the truth. She looked down. Aunt Carol said, the truth is your grandfather loved both of you. Maybe Mason made mistakes, but taking the whole farm from him extreme. I said, I am not taking the farm. Grandpa put it in a trust. Uncle Jim leaned forward. But you control the trust. Yes. And you don't think that looks convenient? There it was. Greedy Clara. Manipulative Clara. Convenient Clara. The story Mason needed everyone to believe. I placed a copy of Grandpa's letter on the coffee table. Read it. No one moved. Mason scoffed. You can wave letters around all day. It doesn't change the fact that Grandpa was old. I looked at him. He was old when you asked about rezoning too. Mason's mouth closed. Aunt Carol frowned. What rezoning? Mason said quickly. Nothing. I opened my bag and took out copies of the developer emails. My father's. Clara, this is unnecessary. No, I said. This is what truth looks like when it stops asking permission. I handed the emails to Aunt Carol. She read the first page, then the second. Her face changed. Uncle Jim took them next. My cousins leaned closer. Mason's voice rose. I was exploring financial options for the family. I said, Grandpa was alive. I knew he was struggling. You knew he was vulnerable. Mason pointed at me. You act like a saint, but you wanted the farm too. I wanted Grandpa safe. You wanted him dependent on. My mother gasped. I felt that accusation in my chest, but it did not knock me. Because Grandpa had prepared me. Do not let bitterness turn you into. Truth is enough. I pulled out ledger copies. Not all of them. Only enough. Dates, loans, notes, developer contact, Grandpa's concern. I placed them on the table. Mason has taken more from this family than anyone wants to admit. Grandpa tracked it because he knew this day would come. Aunt Carol read the ledger. Oh my. My father looked at the floor. Mason's face flushed. That was private. So was Grandpa's illness, I said. But you used it. He stepped toward me. My father finally said, Mason, sit down. Mason turned on him. Now you speak? Dad looked broken. I should have spoken earlier. The room changed. Not fully, but enough. My father looked at me. I knew Mason wanted to sell. I thought it was practical. I told myself your grandfather was being sentimental. I told myself you were too emotional to manage it. My throat tightened, and now? He swallowed. Now the first think Edward knew us better than we knew ourselves. My mother began crying. For once, I was tired of tears. I said, I am not trying to destroy this family. I am trying to stop everyone from pretending Mason's wants are the same as family needs. Aunt Carol set the papers down. Mason, is this true? Mason looked around the room and saw something he was not used to seeing. Doubt, not in me, in him. He grabbed his coat. You all deserve each other. Then he left. The front door slammed. No one chased him. That was new. My mother whispered, what happens now? I picked up my bag. Now we go to court. Dad said, Clara. I paused at the door. He looked older than I had ever seen him. I'm sorry. 2 words. Small, late, but real. I nodded. I know. Then I left. Not because the apology meant nothing. Because I had learned that an apology can be accepted without stopping the truth. The day Grandpa spoke again, the hearing was held in a small courtroom that smelled like paper, polish, and nervous. Mason wore a dark suit. He looked confident again but not relaxed. His attorney spoke first. He argued that Grandpa had been elderly, physically weak, and emotionally dependent on. He suggested the trust amendment suspicious because it favored the person providing daily care. That person was me. Hearing my love described as influence made my stomach turn. But I sat still. Thomas sat behind. My father and mother sat on the other side of the room. Not with Mason, not with me, somewhere in between, which was exactly where they had spent most of their lives. Mr. Henley testified about the document. The trust was properly signed. Grandpa had been mentally clear. A separate medical evaluation from that same month confirmed he understood his decision. Thomas had served only as document custodian, not advisor. Then Thomas testified. Mason's attorney tried to make him look like an outsider. Thomas remained calm. How did you know Edward Whitmore? The attorney asked. Army friend first, business partner later, brother in every way that mattered. I had not known the army part. Grandpa had never talked much about those years. Thomas explained that he and Grandpa had stayed close for decades. He helped with land records, repairs, and private family. Grandpa had contacted him when he began worrying that Mason and my father would pressure him to sell the farm. Mason stared at the table. Then came the ledger. My brother's attorney objected to parts of it. The judge reviewed carefully. Some pages were admitted as evidence of Grandpa's state of mind and Mason's financial pattern. The developer emails were admitted too. That was when Mason's confidence cracked. The courtroom heard how he contacted Harlow Ridge communities before the will reading, how he implied control he did not yet have, how he discussed the timing of a future sale, how he described the farm as underused land with emotional obstacles. That meant Grandpa. That meant me. That meant every memory Mason could not turn into money. My mother cried silently. My father stared straight ahead, ashamed. Then my attorney, a woman named Evelyn Hart, stood. Your Honor, there is one more item. Mason's attorney frowned. What item? Evelyn looked at Thomas. Thomas nodded. She played an audio recording. Grandpa's voice filled the courtroom. Thin, tired, but clear. My heart stopped. This is Edward Whitmore, the recording began. I am making this statement freely with full understanding on the 14th of March. The room became completely still. Grandpa continued. My grandson Mason is not a bad man, but he is an impatient. He sees land and thinks sale. Clara sees land and remembers roots. That is why I made my decision. I covered my mouth. His voice trembled slightly, but his words were strong. If Mason hears the will and smiles, Thomas, give Clara the truth. She will doubt her. She always does when family pushes too hard. Tell her I saw her. Tell her every meal, every ride, every night she sat with me mattered. I cried then, quietly. I could not stop. Grandpa's voice continued. I do not leave Clara in charge because she is perfect. I leave her in charge because she knows love is work. The farm needs work. The family needs truth. Mason has been given chances. Clara has been given burdens. Now I give her authority. Mason looked devastated, but not in the way I expected, not angry, exposed. Grandpa was speaking directly through every lie he had planned. The recording ended with one final sentence. Sparrow, fix the fence. The courtroom stayed silent after it stopped. Even the judge took a moment before speaking. Mason's attorney had little left. He tried to argue Evelyn answered with document. He tried to argue confusion. Evelyn answered with medical record. He tried to argue unfairness. Evelyn answered with the ledger. Truth does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives organized. By the end of the hearing, the judge ruled that the trust appeared valid and enforceable. Mason's challenge was denied pending any further appeal, but the property would remain under my authority as trustee. The farmhouse protected. The developer sale was shut down. Mason did not look at me when it ended. My father approached me outside the courtroom. For once, my mother did not speak first. Dad did. He trusted you more than any of us. I looked at him. Yes, he nodded, eyes wet. He was right. That was the closest my father had ever come to blessing. Mason walked past us. I thought he would leave without speaking, but he stopped near the courthouse steps. His voice was quiet. You always had him. I turned. No, Mason. I showed up. He looked away. For once, he had no answer. The farm after the truth winning did not feel like firework. It felt like sitting alone in Grandpa's kitchen, holding a cold cup of tea, listening to the clock chime. People think justice makes everything light. It does not. Sometimes justice simply removes the lie, and then you are left staring at the damage underneath. The farm was mine to protect now. Not mine to own selfishly, not mine to sell, mine to protect. That responsibility felt heavy. The porch still needed repair, the barn roof needed work. The accounts had to be organized, the trust required reports, the apple trees needed pruning, and my family needed time. Mason disappeared for several weeks. My mother called often but carefully. She did not pressure me. That was new. She asked whether I had eaten, whether I needed help sorting them, whether she could come by. At first I said no. Then one Saturday I said yes. She arrived wearing jeans and an old sweater, not her usual polished clothes. She brought sandwiches and cleaning supplies. We spent 3 hours in the sewing room. At first we sorted in silence. Then she found a photo of me at age 7, missing 2 front teeth, sitting on Grandpa's tractor. She laughed and cried at the same time. You loved that tractor. I thought I was driving it. You were very sure of yourself. I smiled. I wonder what happened. She looked at me sadly. We happened. I did not answer. She folded the photo carefully. Clara, I am sorry I made you feel like keeping peace mattered more than that apology landed differently because it named the wound, not everything, but something real. I needed you to see me, I said. I know you saw Mason. She nodded. I saw the son I wanted him to be. We kept sorting. Healing, I learned, is sometimes not a grand conversation. Sometimes it is two women folding old fabric in a dusty room, finally saying what should have been said years earlier. My father came the next week. He brought tools, no speech, no dramatic apology, just tools. He fixed the loose step on the porch while I cleared brush near the fence. For 2 hours we worked in silence. Then he said, "Your grandfather used to say I measured worth wrong." I leaned on the rake. What did he mean? Dad kept his eyes on the step. I thought success was control, he thought it was character. I waited. Dad hammered a nail. I pushed Mason because he looked like the future I wanted. I dismissed you because you looked like service, and I was foolish enough to think service was small. My throat tightened. It wasn't small. No, he said. It was the only thing that held this place together. He did not ask for forgiveness. That helped. People who demand forgiveness are often still thinking about themselves. Dad simply worked. At lunch, he sat at Grandpa's kitchen table and looked around. I don't know how to be your father properly, he said. I sat across from him. That is honest. He gave a sad smile. Your grandfather would say honest is a start. He would. Mason returned in the form of a letter. Not a text, not a call. A letter. It arrived 3 months after the hearing. Clara, I hated you for winning because it was easier than admitting I lost before court. I lost when Grandpa was alive and I chose opportunity over. I told myself the farm was wasted because I did not want to admit I had wasted my chances. I do not expect you to trust me. I would not trust me either. I am sorry for what I said about you playing nurse. You did what I should have done. Mason, I read the letter 3 times. Then I placed it in the ledger not because it fixed everything, because it belonged with the record months past the farm, slowly came back to life. I used preservation funds carefully. I hired local workers to repair the barn room. I reopened the workshop for community classes. I turned one room into a small archive of Grandpa's tools, photographs. I kept the apple tree. The first public event was a small one. A fall harvest day. Neighbors came. Children painted pumpkins. Older men stood around the workshop pretending not to be emotional about Grandpa's tools. My mother served cider. My father helped direct parking. Mason came near the end. He stood by the fence, uncertain. I saw him but did not rush over. Eventually, he walked toward me. The place looks good, he said. Thank you. He looked at the barn. Grandpa would have liked it. Yes, he swallowed. I'm in counseling. That surprised me. Good, I'm also working. Not a big plan. Just a job. Good. He laughed softly. You always say a lot with one word. I almost smiled. He looked at me. I don't want the farm, I know. I think I wanted what it meant. What did it mean? He looked around. That I mattered most. That honesty hurt. Because beneath all the selfishness, there was a boy who had been crowned so often he thought love had to look like winning. You mattered, I said. But you were not the only one. His eyes filled. I know that now. I nodded. That is a start. The stranger's final gift, Thomas Reed, became part of the farm after that. At first he came as oversight wit, then as friend. He taught me things Grandpa had not had time to explain. Which accounts paid taxes, which part of the south field flooded every 3rd spring, which boards in the barn were original, which neighbor still owed Grandpa a pie from 1987. One afternoon we sat on the porch after a long day sorting. Thomas held a cup of coffee and stared at the apple tree. Edward was proud of you, Ed. I looked at him. Did he say that? All the time. My throat tightened. I wish he had said it more to me. Thomas nodded. He came from a generation that hid tenderness inside chores. I laughed quietly. That sounds like him. Thomas reached into his coat pocket and pulled out one last envelope. My heart jumped. Another one? The last. On the front, Grandpa had written for Clara when she stops fighting and starts building. I opened it slowly. Sparrow, if you are reading this, the storm has passed enough for you to breathe. I am sorry I had to leave things in a way that caused pain. I know you wanted simple love, not documents and hidden keys. But I knew our family. I knew Mason would read. I knew your father would justify. I knew your mother would cry instead of choose. And I knew you would wonder if standing up for yourself made you cruel. It does not. A fence is not cruel because it keeps the garden safe. You will be tempted to save everyone from the consequences of their choice. Do not. Let Mason become honest without rewarding his dishonesty. Let your father earn trust without handing him control. Let your mother love you without letting tears make decisions. And let yourself live. The farm is not your burden. It is your root. Build something here that outlives the fight. Love, Grandpa. I held the letter for a long time. Thomas stood and walked to the porch steps, giving me privacy without leaving me alone. That was kindness. Not loud, not demanding, just present. A year after the will reading, the farm hosted its first official community restoration workshop. We taught people how to repair old furniture, preserve family photographs, and care for small gardens. I named it the Sparrow House Program because Grandpa would have pretended to hate that and secretly loved it. Mason helped set up chairs. My father repaired a table. My mother arranged flowers in mason jars. Thomas stood near the door greeting guests like a quiet guardian of everything Grandpa had. During the opening speech, I stood in front of the workshop with my hands shaking. I looked at the crowd, neighbors, family, students, volunteers, and for a moment I saw Grandpa leaning against the barn door, arms crossed, pretending not to smile. I said, my grandfather believed old things could be saved if the foundation. This farm survived because he left truth behind. Not just for me, but for all of us. My voice trembled. This place is not about inheritance anymore. It is about responsibility. It is about showing up. It is about understanding that family is not proven by who gets the most, but by who protects what love built. My mother cried. My father wiped his eyes. Mason looked down. Thomas smiled. After the speech, a little girl came up to me holding a broken wooden birdhouse. Can you fix this? She asked. I knelt down. We can try. She smiled. I looked at the birdhouse, then at the farm, then at the people moving through the yard. For the first time, the place did not feel like a battlefield. It felt like a beginning. What the will never said. My brother smiled at the will, because he thought the story was over. He thought a lawyer's voice had handed him the farm. He thought my silence would protect him. He thought my father's favoritism would carry him one last time. He thought Grandpa's death meant Grandpa could no longer speak. But truth has a way of waiting. Sometimes it waits in a leather folder held by an old friend. Sometimes it waits inside a clock. Sometimes it waits in a ledger, a letter, a recording, a line written by a shaking hand. Sometimes it waits inside the person everyone trained to be quiet. That person was me. I used to think being good meant not making trouble. I thought love meant understanding everyone's, even when their reasons hurt me. I thought family peace was something I had to purchase with my own silence. I thought Mason's needs mattered more because everyone acted like they did. I thought my father's approval was something I could earn if I stayed useful enough. Grandpa saw through all of that. He knew I would doubt myself, so he left proof. Not just legal proof, emotional proof. He left words that said, I saw you. Sometimes that is the deepest inheritance, not land, not money, not a house. To be seen clearly by someone you love. Mason and I are not close now, but we are on. That is better than fake closeness. My father and I are rebuilding slowly, not as the father who commands and the daughter who obeys, as two people learning the cost of old mistakes. My mother visits the farm often. She still cries easily, but now she also speaks. When something is wrong, she says so. When Mason makes excuses, she does not rush to protect him. That may sound small, but in my family, that is a revolution. And Thomas? Thomas still comes every Thursday morning. He drinks coffee on the porch, complains that I prune the apple trees too carefully, and tells stories about Grandpa that make me laugh and ache at the same time. The grandfather clock still stands in the hallway. I keep the ledger locked away now, not as a weapon, as a record, because families that erase the truth are doomed to repeat the lie. The farm remains in trust. It cannot be sold to developers. It cannot be quietly taken. It cannot be turned into someone's quick profit. It stands, like Grandpa wanted, like I finally learned to do. And sometimes when the evening light falls across the porch and the apple trees move in the wind, I hear his voice in my fix the fence, Sparrow. I understand now what he meant. He was not only talking about wood and nails, he was talking about boundaries, truth, self-respect, the line between forgiveness and surrender, the space between love and being. I fixed the fence. Not perfectly, not all at once, but enough to keep the garden safe. If you are listening to this and you have been made to feel greedy for asking what is fair, difficult for telling the truth, or dramatic for remembering what others want buried, then hear me clearly. You are not wrong for wanting facts. You are not cruel for protecting what was entrusted to you. You are not selfish for refusing to let the loudest person rewrite the story. Sometimes the people who smile first are the ones most afraid of what comes next. My brother smiled at the will. Then a stranger told the truth. But that stranger did not bring revenge. He brought Grandpa's voice back into the room. And once the truth was spoken, no one could pretend they had not heard it. That was the real inheritance. The farm was only land. The money was only paper. The house was only wood and walls. The real inheritance was the courage to stand in front of my family and say, no more silence, no more pretend, no more crowns for the person who never showed up. Grandpa's house remembered. And finally, so did everyone else.